Hey everyone, author MJ Gallagher here and welcome back to Rebirth Revealed, a series presented and funded by Kupocon. This episode covers the details and lore you may have missed from the Upper Junon section of Chapter 4. It's self-titled Dawn of a New Era. Spoilers beyond this part of the game are minimal, but as always, please beware of likely spoilers for the original Final Fantasy VII, its remake, and the compilation in general. So let's hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and march on in. To mark the transition between the Under Junon scenario and the events that are about to transpire, we are treated to a breathtaking cutscene featuring Rufus Shinra. Just as with Final Fantasy VII Remake, the new president is introduced by arriving in a B-09 helicopter, alongside his faithful guardhound, Darkstar. Darkstar of course is known as Dark Nation in both the original game and the Japanese edition of the Remake trilogy, and even appears under the name Umbra in some localised concept art, which may have been a cheeky reference to one of Lunafreya's canine messengers from Final Fantasy XV. Having sought the assistance of Priscilla and Mr. Dolphin to get topside, the party makes its way up through the Junon aerodrome. As they climb the steps to the airstrip, Tifa asks about the Highwind hovering overhead, then Barrett suggests they steal it. This is a fun bit of foreshadowing because Barrett does help commandeer the airship in the old game and uses it to rescue Tifa from atop the Mako cannon. It's also a nice touch to have Aerith present for this scene, as her key character art in the original depicted her standing on the airstrip admiring the Highwind, despite never getting to ride on it herself. Curiously, neither the rocky coastline of the Junon region nor the ocean beyond match the verdant meadows displayed in Rebirth's recreation of the key art. On the red carpet there is a pair of Shinra soldiers comparing the nearby aircraft. One is gushing about the Highwind, while another prefers Relnikas and how their wings fold down during takeoff. This may have caused some confusion for veteran fans, because there's a fleet of planes in Final Fantasy VII that are shown to do this in a cutscene during the Huge Materia questline. However, those transport vessels were called Gelnikas, from the Japanese Guernica. Chapter 9 of Rebirth verifies that the localisation has been updated. Interestingly though, this is not the first time we've heard the term in the Remake trilogy, because the owner of the weapon store in Wall Market also references a Relnica. One final point to note is that the Relnica's design in Rebirth actually reflects the Crisis Core version that bombed Benora, because the engines sit below the wings rather than on top, as in the old game. On a more obscure note, the large helicopter adjacent to the Relnicas has a suspicious resemblance to the Dragonfly models used by Deep Ground during Dirge of Cerberus, while there are smaller, single-pilot jets dotted around the hangars. It makes perfect sense that jet engines would exist in a world that already has rocket engines, but this finally explains why there's a fighter jet lodged among the archaeological dig site of Bone Village in the original. As you move around the aerodrome, there are a number of cool references to Junon and the inauguration parade in Final Fantasy VII. My personal favourite is the infantry squad that are marching hilariously out of time, which is a likely callback to Cloud stumbling into a unit during the live procession. There's also a passing recommendation to avoid angering director Heidegger, who was something of a loose cannon, pardon the pun, after the parade in the old game, being denied access to the deep sea elevator, which leads to the submarine dock and the underwater reactor, and recurring references to Rufus's reign being a new era for Shinra. Curiously, New Age was the slogan used on the parade banners in the original, but there's no such slogan in Rebirth. In any case, this is the context for why Chapter 4 is titled Dawn of a New Era. In what probably came as a big shock to many, there's an interlude scene whose focus is a discussion between Rufus and Glenn Lodbrok, a character that players of the mobile game Ever Crisis had become acquainted with in advance of Rebirth's release. To summarise, Glenn was a Project Zero soldier, one of the prototypes that existed before Shinra began injecting Genova cells into members of its elite force. During his Ever Crisis storyline, penned by the Final Fantasy VII Saga's lead scenario writer Kazushige Najima, and titled The First Soldier. Glenn leads a survey team to the remote Redor archipelago. They encounter violent resistance from the native Redorans, so Shinra deploys a young Sephiroth to eradicate the enemy. Sephiroth discloses that this is his first field mission, so Glenn tries to teach him the merits of showing compassion to an opponent, and the value of one's existence. In Rebirth, however, set 15 years later, Rufus is surprised to see Glenn, because he shot him in the back during their last meeting. It transpires that the former soldier is now working with Wutai, who Rufus himself has historic ties to. As was revealed in Chapter 14 of Before Crisis, another mobile entry in the compilation, Rufus Shinra was the man pulling the strings of Avalanche's militant wing. That chapter was set in Wutai, around a decade after the events of The First Soldier. Could this mean Glenn also has a past with Avalanche? And is his remark that Rufus started this an allusion to the President previously playing both sides? The conversation eventually turns to the Magnus materia, over which Shinra and Wutai are conspiring to manufacture conflict. Magnus is the Latin word for great, suggesting this is the new localised term for huge materia. Interestingly, huge materia is what Scarlet is after in the original Final Fantasy VII, so the rumoured ultimate materia Yuffie tries to steal from Scarlet's facility in episode Intermission may actually have been whispers of the Magnus materia. It's also worth pointing out that Lodbrok is the moniker of a semi-legendary Viking king, Ragnar, who earned his renown in battle and by carrying out raids on the British Isles. This may have inspired Glenn's role as a soldier, a leader, and his mission to survey the islands of Redor. That said, the developers have confirmed that his character was created for Rebirth, then later implemented in Ever Crisis. Anyway, perhaps just as famous as the legends of Ragnar are the tales of his warrior sons. While I don't wish to add fuel to any particular controversial theory, I've spoken a few times already in this video series about why the sum of 2000 gil is important to Cloud, and how it connects to his father. I'm sure it's just a coincidence though that immediately after the scene with Glenn and Rufus, Cloud can find an item chest above an old seaplane containing that exact amount. Unlike his conscription for the parade in the original game, Cloud changes into Shinra infantry fatigues by choice this time around, and is even accompanied by Tifa and Aerith. The trio is then drafted into Midgar's 7th Infantry, and familiarised with the Honeybee Inn style parade mechanics, which Cloud is expected to take the lead on as the squadron's newly appointed captain. Following this, the player can head into the city proper to round up the units of the 7th Infantry. Cloud, Tifa and Aerith find themselves in the level 3 residential district of Upper Junon. Those familiar with Crisis Core may recall that this is the exact street down which Zack pursues Hollander, after the scientist has broken out of confinement. It's also worth noting Junon is now divided into the Larboard and Starboard sectors, rather than Upper and Lower Junon as in Crisis Core, or L Junon and R Junon as in Before Crisis. Larboard, also known as Port, and Starboard are common nautical terms for the left and right side of a vessel. This further supports Junon's world intel entry that the city can be likened to a vast battleship, the significance of which I discussed in the previous video. Something that many fans hoped for in advance of Rebirth's release was the return of Barrett's sailor suit. The game doesn't disappoint, but it does add to the outfit. Where his gun arm is typically connected, he now has a hook. This ties into the nautical theme too, as hooked hands are often associated with pirates, but it's also a clever reference to Barrett's chapter in the official novel On the Way to a Smile. During that episode, it's revealed that the first ever prosthetic he was given by Old Man Sakaki was indeed a hook. And speaking of books and Corell's residence, a closer examination of some of the billboards around the thoroughfare will show advertisements for Meditation's The Outlaw Life, an autobiography by Gus. The relevance of this will become apparent later in Rebirth, as it will for Loveless G Edition, a theatrical performance taking place at the Gold Saucer. Similar to those in Midgar throughout Remake, there are also several promotional posters for the military. One outside the locker room has the slogan, "Victory favours the virtuous." This is a likely play on the Latin proverb, "Audentes fortuna juvat," typically translated as "fortune favours the brave." And in the glabrescent bar is an ad depicting a verdant bay that reads, "Deep dive in the Emerald Sea." The green hills in the image create the illusion of the emerald weapon from the old game, akin to the ruby weapon poster we've seen many times already. There are also a few cool references to be found in the mall, such as the movies being shown at the cinema. These are The Nightmare Begins, Tango of Tears, and Attack of the Weapon, all of which are named after music tracks from the original Final Fantasy VII. These respectively relate to Vincent Valentine and Shinra Manor, hence the Dorky Face and Haunted Mansion, Losing at the Chocobo Races, hence the Cowgirl and Bird, and the colossal weapons laying siege to various locations, including Junon, hence the Terminator. I sure wonder how an iconic character from a franchise about fighting to prevent a known future could possibly relate to Rebirth. Earlier in the video series, I discussed how the different dog breeds of stamp are being used in the trilogy as a visual indicator for which reality a scene is taking place in. For example, Beagle stamp denotes the main storyline, while Terrier stamp is shown alongside Zack. The presence of a terminal with a sad-looking terrier stamp on this street in Junon therefore sparked all sorts of theories when Rebirth first released. Devastatingly, it was later amended in an update patch. Nevertheless, the cutout that Cloud can put his face into almost seems a bit meta, as if the development team are toying with our interpretations of what the canine mascot represents. On the subject of Stamp, he is painted on the walls of the staircase leading down to the glabrescent bar. This may be a nod to the graffiti used in Remake to guide the way for Avalanche operatives in the tunnels of Midgar. Following Rude into the bar itself is one of several callbacks to the original that exist in this part of the chapter. In Final Fantasy VII, the Turk can be trailed to a shady basement establishment where he's playing cards. Elena, on the other hand, is in the swanky Le Soleil lounge, worrying about what her colleagues think of her. In the old game, she can be located in a comparable Junon saloon, drinking with Sung and Reno. As an additional piece of trivia, the Ultimania Omega revealed that that particular bar was an early design for 7th Heaven. Elsewhere, customers in the jewellery store mention that the owner is a former soldier, while speaking to him indicates he's pretty unwell. This is almost certainly an allusion to the ex-soldier vendor in the original, who, upon returning to Junon later in the game, has donned black robes. Similarly, there's a guy with cats in the upstairs section of the garrison station, while one of the units downstairs is discussing parade formations using figurines that resemble the 135th soldiers from the old game. The function of these figures has confused fans for more than 25 years, because many believed each one to be from a set of 35, not realising that the 135th element was a scale ratio. Perhaps the developers were aware of this, and included the scale model of the Mako cannon as a little Easter egg. Veteran fans may have noticed that the box itself refers to the cannon as the Sister Ray, which is of course written on the side of its barrel in Final Fantasy VII, as seen when Tifa is escaping the gas chamber, and was the name given to the weapon by Scarlet. In the briefing room at the top floor of the barracks, there are infantrymen chatting about where Rufus Shinra has been of late. One of them remarks that he hasn't been in Midgar, then suggests he's been off seeing the world. This is a potential nod to Rufus's introduction in the original Final Fantasy VII, when Barrett states the company's official position is that the Vice President has been on a long-term business trip. In Before Crisis, however, it's revealed that Rufus was secretly arrested and confined in the Shinra building by his father due to his involvement with Avalanche. This last detail is surprisingly easy to miss, but once Cloud has gathered enough of the 7th Infantry's units, the Shinra middle manager will appear on the street, giving an interview to a TV reporter. The middle manager is a recurring minor character in the old game, and can be encountered in Junon while Cloud is dressed as a trooper, where he complains about being stuck in low budget accommodation despite travelling to the city on company business. He also features a few times in Remake, initially at the end of Chapter 2 when he argues with Barrett and mentions the Shinra Creed. During episode intermission, the middle manager is one of Yuffie's opponents for the Fort Condor minigame, and tells the young ninja that he's learning how to play so he can teach his daughter. In Rebirth, if you linger long enough, you'll hear him make reference to his business trip, the Shinra Creed, his daughter playing Fort Condor, and even the dawning of a new era. With respect to the inauguration parade itself, the player can choose from 4 formations, based on which types of military personnel they have tracked down. These are named after the summons Ifrit, Shiva and Rama, with the 4th, Bahamut, becoming available if Cloud rounds up all 10 units of the 7th Infantry. During the performance itself, Cloud leads from the front, having traded his Buster Sword for a cutlass. This is a nice detail because cutlasses were a common weapon among seafarers in centuries past. One of the cool things here is that the parade is presented to the player in the form of a television broadcast, which is exactly what happens in the original game. The TV ratings element is also reflected in the judges tabulating votes from viewers, doubling as the player's score for this minigame. After each phase of the performance, the broadcast momentarily switches to a digital image of the world map. Without getting into specifics, this version of the map has been lifted from the old Final Fantasy VII rather than Rebirth, because there's at least one significant landmass that has been moved in this game. Before Rufus begins his speech and hands out the presidential commendation, there's a short scene with Sung at the command centre. As he pauses to watch Aerith on one of the monitors, he receives a call on his cell phone. The ringtone is the theme from Shinra HQ, which compares to Rude in Chapter 8 of Remake having the victory fanfare as his ringtone. If the player's viewer ratings reach 100,000 or more, Midgar's 7th Infantry will win the prize for outstanding performance from Heidegger, in addition to the presidential commendation from Rufus. Otherwise, Roche's mobile unit will be awarded the former. In either case, Cloud uses the cutlass for his iconic victory pose, which is a callback to the original, when he does the same at the climax of Rufus and Heidegger's send-off at the docks. Should the player perform highly enough in that sequence, Heidegger will reward them with the Force Stealer sword. This too is referenced by Cloud acquiring the rune blade in the passage directly behind the presentation stage. In the old game, the rune blade is actually found on Mount Nebel, but I'll come back to this change in a future episode. If the 7th Infantry do win both awards, Cloud's first celebration is captured by a camera operator in a familiar Moogle hat and poncho. Not only is this the same outfit that Yuffie wears for much of episode intermission, but if she's recruited by the player during Final Fantasy VII before Sephiroth summons Meteor, the ninja will appear on a street in Junon while the Sapphire weapon is attacking, disguised as a news reporter and accompanied by a cameraman. Among the most interesting aspects of this whole scenario is that Rufus's speech and subsequent private discussion with Cloud, Aerith and Tifa, after he calls them onto the stage, covers some of the character and plot points that were skipped over during the new president's introduction in Remake. For example, only Cloud speaks with Rufus in the revised scene at the height of Shinra headquarters, and their conversation doesn't include the latter's vision to rule in a different way from his father, their shared desire to stop Sephiroth, or that Rufus likes to make speeches. In addition to this, there are several moments throughout the parade sequence that are direct allusions to the wider compilation of Final Fantasy VII. Rufus orders the Mako cannon to be fired for the first time in years, exactly as he does when the Sapphire weapon attacks Junon in the original. Then, on the podium, he tells Cloud that one of the duties he's inherited is to arrest and execute Avalanche, which is exactly what he attempts during the aforementioned set piece. Rufus also proposes a truce and offers to entrust Cloud, a former soldier, with tracking down their mutual enemy Sephiroth, so he can focus on rebuilding Midgar. This parallels Advent Children, and Rufus seeking to hire Cloud to help contain the actions of Kadaj, Loz and Yazoo, so that Shinra can focus on rebuilding the world. And from a slightly more obscure corner of the compilation, Yuffie's assassination attempt is not the first time a rebel faction has tried to kill the president of Shinra in Junon. Avalanche's assault on the city in Chapter 2 of Before Crisis culminates in Fajito, one of the organisation's leaders, shooting the president in the chest. In fact, it is this specific incident that Heidegger references in the opening chapter of Remake, when he mentions the previous attempt on President Shinra's life. With Junon on high alert and the military in the hunt for the would-be assassin, the group decides to head for the harbour. Cloud, however, is approached by 5 members of the 7th Infantry, who insist on accompanying him on his fake task of sharing intelligence with other units. The troopers will fight alongside Cloud as he descends through the seaport facility, treating other army personnel as hostile on the basis that they may be terrorists in disguise. Despite the game encouraging the player to keep all 5 of them alive, it's actually impossible to lose more than 2, because the rest will simply remain at 1 HP in battle. Curiously, the number of surviving troopers has no impact on the end cutscene with the 7th Infantry, which happens to be one of the most wholesome in Rebirth. Not to worry though, we'll definitely see these guys again. What does change, depending on whether you kept all 5 soldiers alive, are the accolades from Roche after he's defeated in the training arena, as well as the items he rewards you. This could be a callback to Chapter 4 of Remake, which is where the so-called Speed Demon first appears in the story, because Cloud's performance in the Corkscrew Tunnel and motorbike duel with Roche will affect how Jesse reacts to him afterwards. If you're successful in protecting the 7th Infantry, Roche will gift Cloud the Speed Demon keychain, which is almost as fantastic as his mid-battle Gladiator reference, "Are you not entertained?" And finally, just as they do in the original, the party takes advantage of their Shinra uniforms to hitch a ride on the ship to Costa del Sol by boarding via the cargo hold, albeit this time they accomplish it by misleading Captain Titov. Titov himself is a character newly introduced in Rebirth, and I'll speak more about him in my Chapter 5 breakdown. Chapter 4, however, ends with a recurring character sprinting along the wharf and having a tantrum because she's missed the ferry. This of course is Kirei Kanan, a con artist who features in Remake and can be encountered in optional side quests early in Rebirth. If the player hasn't participated in either of those quests though, imagine Kirei's sudden appearance here would seem as jarring as Kate Sith watching the collapse of Sector 7 in Remake. Nevertheless, the scene isn't as random as you might think. Kirei debuted in the official novel The Kids Are Alright, written by Kazushige Nojima, and she is associated with Costa del Sol throughout. For example, she's singing the jingle to one of the resort's advertisements at the beginning of the story. She has posters of the seaside town on her living space walls. She suggests to the protagonist Evan that they retire to Costa del Sol, and even packs a bathing suit when the pair set off on their journey, in case they end up there. Eagle-eyed fans may also have spotted that the backpack Kirei is carrying in this scene is exactly the same as the one worn by her grandmother Mireille during Remake. The bag is mentioned in The Kids Are Alright, but its inclusion here could simply be a little teaser of things to come. As for what Kirei has been up to in the Junon region and her exploits as a wannabe merc for hire, I'll come back to that in the next episode. Well folks, that's all for now. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I invite you to check out all future episodes on KupoCon's channel. If you're interested in the lore side of things, my own books, Norse myths that inspired Final Fantasy VII and Greek myths that inspired Final Fantasy VII, are both available on Amazon. As always, I'd especially like to thank all of KupoCon's Patreon subscribers for your continued support. Without your backing, productions such as this would not be possible. If you're not already a patron, please do consider joining for some incredible KupoCon exclusives. But for now, take care. I'm MJ Gallagher, and I'll speak to you again soon.